You're a relic of the startup phase, Elena. It's time to let real visionaries take the wheel. Chloe's voice didn't just carry across the rooftop garden, it sliced through the celebratory atmosphere of our firm's 25th anniversary gala. My younger sister stood there, champagne flute raised like a scepter, while 300 of the city's elite watched my public execution. I looked at my father, expecting the man who raised me to defend the daughter who had saved his legacy. Instead, he simply adjusted his tuxedo and nodded, his gaze fixed on the skyline. "Chloe has the MBA, Elena," he muttered. "She has the polish. You're just the girl in the server room." I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply reached into my clutch, pulled out a sleek silver envelope, and placed it on the table between them. "Happy anniversary, Dad," I said, my voice terrifyingly calm. As I walked toward the elevators, the whispers started. They thought I was retreating in shame. They didn't realize that in exactly 12 hours, the girl in the server room was going to turn their entire empire into a ghost town. Before we get into the secret move I made that night, I need to hear from you. Drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and what time it is in your corner of the world. Whether it's midnight or noon, you're part of this community, and your presence matters to me. Let's connect. To the world, we were a success story, but my roots were buried in the scent of solder and dust in our family's original basement workshop. For nearly 3 decades, my father had labored there, keeping a flickering flame of a business alive, while my sister Chloe was groomed for greatness. She was the star, the Ivy League scholar in London who sent postcards from 5-star hotels, while I spent my weekends untangling motherboards and rewriting broken code. I chose a local university for my software engineering degree, specifically so I could keep Dad's shop from sinking. I remember one summer when Chloe visited, draped in designer silk that cost more than our monthly rent. She watched me scrub thermal paste off my hands and sighed with a theatrical kind of pity. "Elena, you're burying yourself in this graveyard," she'd said, checking her reflection in a cracked monitor. "You have a decent brain. Why use it to fix people's junk? You should be networking in New York, not playing mechanic in a basement." She saw a graveyard. I saw a gold mine. While she was learning how to talk about disrupting markets in mahogany-paneled classrooms, I was actually doing it. I was spotting the digital gaps that the big firms ignored, and I was building the bridge to cross them. The transformation didn't happen overnight. It was forged in the fire of 80-hour work weeks and a diet of lukewarm coffee. During my senior year, I developed CoreLogix, a streamlined cloud framework designed to help mid-sized shipping hubs manage complex logistics. It wasn't flashy, but it was bulletproof. When the first 5-figure licensing check cleared, Dad looked at the screen, then at me, with a rare, fleeting smile. "I suppose you've got a bit of your old man's grit after all, Elle," he said. That single sentence was the fuel that kept me going for the next 5 years. While I was sleeping on a cot in the back office and scaling our annual revenue toward the $2.5 million mark, Chloe was living a different life. She was a rising star in Hong Kong's venture capital scene, her social media a curated gallery of high-rise galas and infinity pools. She never asked about the business unless she was mocking its lack of branding. But money has a way of changing perspectives. The moment we hit that $2.5 million milestone, and the trade journal started calling us a rising star in logistics, Chloe's tune changed. She didn't just visit. She moved back with 3 trunks of designer luggage and a sense of entitlement that sucked the oxygen out of the room. "It's time we brought some global sophistication to this operation," she announced over a family dinner Dad had insisted on. "I've decided to step in and handle the strategic expansion. With my pedigree, we could be a billion-dollar player." I waited for Dad to remind her who had actually built the servers, who had coded the architecture, and who had secured the clients. Instead, he beamed, his eyes moist with pride. "That's my brilliant girl," he whispered, reaching across the table to pat her hand. We've been waiting for a real professional touch. Elena has done well, but she's reached her ceiling. You're the one who can take us to the moon. I sat there, the taste of the meal turning to ash in my mouth. I was the one who had built the rocket, but my sister was being handed the keys to the cockpit simply because she knew how to dress for the journey. For the next 5 years, I lived through a slow-motion hijacking of my own life's work. Dad's compromise was to appoint Chloe as Executive Co-CEO, a title that carried all the prestige, while I was relegated to the technical weeds. I stayed because of a misplaced sense of loyalty, a sunk cost fallacy that told me if I just worked harder, they would eventually see my worth. I convinced myself that being a team player meant letting my sister shine while I kept the foundation from cracking. It was a masterclass in corporate gaslighting. While I was in the trenches, coding the API updates and managing the actual human beings who kept our servers running, Chloe was curating an image of a tech visionary. She gave TED-style talks on the future of logistics and landed on Power 100 lists for entrepreneurship, all while using my team's innovations as her personal props. She didn't know the difference between a back-end database and a front-end interface. Yet she spoke with the unearned confidence of a conqueror. As our valuation climbed toward $50 million, the distance between us turned into a canyon. Chloe began streamlining our communications, which was really just a polite way of locking me out of the boardroom. Decisions about the company's future were made over mimosas between her and Dad, while I received the minutes of those meetings via CC email like any other middle manager. I was becoming a ghost in the house I had built, a liability whose quiet competence was no match for Chloe's polished noise. The glass atrium was filled with the glitter of the city's power players, all gathered for my father's anniversary gala. I had spent the afternoon ensuring the logistics were flawless, only to be met with a sneer from Chloe about my lack of presence. I brushed it off, but the air felt heavy, like the atmosphere before a lightning strike. During the main course, Chloe stood, the light catching her diamonds as she clinked her glass. I expected a toast to Dad's 25 years of grit. Instead, she adjusted the microphone with a predatory smile. "As we look to the next decade," she began, her voice amplified and icy, "it's clear that our firm requires a consolidated command. The board and the founders have agreed. The era of dual leadership is over." My breath hitched. I looked at Dad. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "To thrive, we must remove the static in the signal," Chloe continued, her gaze locking onto mine with terrifying triumph. "Effective tonight, I am stepping in as the sole CEO. We've reached a point where certain technical elements are no longer accelerating our growth. They're inhibiting it. My sister, Elena, has been a dedicated worker, but, frankly, she's a growth inhibitor. She lacks the vision, the polish, and the strategic instinct required for this level of play. Elena, you're simply not a high-value asset anymore." The room went deathly quiet. I waited for Dad to stand up, to say this wasn't the plan, to tell her she had gone too far. Instead, he reached out and patted Chloe's hand, a look of immense relief on his face, as if a burden had been lifted. He nodded to the crowd, validating every cruel word she had uttered. I didn't cause a scene. I didn't scream at the injustice of the $50 million I had built being handed to a socialite. I stood up slowly, the silence of the room pressing against my eardrums. I walked to the head table, placed the silver envelope in front of my father, and whispered, "You always did prefer the shine over the substance, Dad. Enjoy the glow while it lasts." I walked out with my head held high, leaving the visionaries to their party. They thought they had just fired an employee. They didn't realize they had just triggered a self-destruct sequence. While the music was likely still playing at the atrium, I was back in my home office, the blue light of my monitors the only glow in the room. Chloe thought she had performed a corporate takeover. She didn't realize she had actually walked into a legal minefield I'd been laying for 3 years. I opened a folder I had labeled The Contingency. First, I pulled up the capitalization table. When Dad needed a massive cash infusion for our international expansion 3 years ago, he hadn't gone to a bank. He had come to me. Chloe was too busy networking in Hong Kong to notice that Dad had signed over 27% of his equity in exchange for my personal savings and a lien on my properties. Added to my original 25%, I didn't just have a seat at the table. I owned the table with a 52% majority. Next, I looked at the intellectual property filings. The CoreLogix framework wasn't actually an asset of the family firm. It was proprietary code owned by my independent holding company, Apex Logic Systems. The family business was merely a tenant, using the software under a strict licensing agreement I had drafted myself. I scrolled down to the expiration date. It was set for 8 a.m. the following morning. A cold, calm smile spread across my face. I had spent 10 years being the quiet one who did the work. Now, the quiet one was going to speak, and the sound would be deafening. At 3:14 a.m., I didn't just send emails. I triggered a series of automated transition protocols. To our top 20 clients, I sent a formal notice of my departure, triggering the key man clauses that allowed them to void their contracts if I was no longer overseeing their accounts. To my lead developers, the ones who actually built the code, I sent offers to join Apex Logic with immediate signing bonuses. By the time the sun began to peek over the horizon, the $50 million empire Chloe thought she had inherited was nothing more than a hollow shell. She had the title, she had the office, and she had the business cards. But I had the keys to the engine, and I was taking them with me. At precisely 9 a.m., I pushed open the heavy oak doors of the executive suite. Chloe was already behind my desk, feet up, sipping an oat milk latte, while Dad stood by the window, looking out like a king surveying his kingdom. "Elena," Chloe drawled, not even bothering to look up. "I thought we made it clear last night. Your keycard should have been deactivated. I'll have security escort you out to save you the embarrassment." "You could try," I said, pulling a leather-bound dossier from my bag and sliding it onto the desk. "But it's difficult to trespass on property you technically own." Dad turned, a frown deepening his wrinkles. "Elena, don't be difficult. The board met. We made a decision for the good of the family." "That's the thing about the board, Dad," I replied, leaning against the doorframe. "You and Chloe only hold 48% of the voting power. You seem to have forgotten the Series B expansion paperwork from 3 years ago. You were so eager to get back to Chloe's Young Entrepreneur Gala that you signed the equity transfer without reading the fine print. I didn't just fund the expansion. I bought your control. I'm the majority shareholder." The silence that followed was heavy enough to choke on. Chloe's latte remained frozen halfway to her mouth. "That's impossible," she stammered, her voice losing its edge. "The lawyers would have told us." "The lawyers work for the majority owner, Chloe, which is me," I said. I tapped a command on my phone. On the massive 80-inch monitor behind her, a red "License Expired" warning flashed across the screen. "And while we're talking about things you don't own, the entire CoreLogix architecture? The engine that runs this $50 million company? The license for the family firm to use that code expired at 8:01 this morning. I've just revoked access." Dad collapsed into one of the guest chairs, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. "The renewal forms, you said they were routine." "They were," I said. "Routine for a company that respects its founder. But since I'm a growth inhibitor and a relic, I decided my software was too old-fashioned for your new vision." As of right now, this company has no operating system, no majority leadership, and I checked my phone as a notification chirped. No clients. My top 12 accounts just received my personal departure notice. They're already requesting to move their data to my private servers. Chloe's perfect mask didn't just crack. It shattered. She looked at the blank monitors, then at Dad, then back at me. The visionary was finally seeing the truth. She had inherited a Ferrari, but I had taken the engine out and driven away with it while she was still bragging about the paint job. The atmosphere in the executive suite shifted from corporate triumph to a funeral in less than 60 seconds. Outside the glass partitions, the humming heartbeat of the office flatlined. I watched through the window as rows of monitors on the developers' desks flickered and died, replaced by a cold, system-wide lockout screen. Then, the phones started. A chorus of jagged ringing erupted from the sales floor, angry clients finding their logistics dashboards frozen, demanding answers that Chloe didn't have the technical vocabulary to provide. She was staring at her smartphone, her thumbs trembling as she scrolled through a flood of contract termination alerts. The Power 100 entrepreneur was hyperventilating, her carefully curated persona melting away like cheap wax. "Fix it, Elena," Dad barked, though his voice lacked its usual bite. It was a plea, not a command. "This is a family business. You can't just pull the plug on your own father." "You pulled the plug on me last night, Dad. In front of 300 people," I reminded him, my voice a low, steady hum against the backdrop of office chaos. "You traded the person who built the engine for the person who liked the hood ornament. This isn't a business anymore. It's a digital graveyard." Chloe finally looked up, her eyes wild. "We'll sue you. You can't steal the clients." "I'm not stealing anything, Chloe. I'm simply leaving with what I own." Clients are leaving because they realize the visionary in the corner office doesn't know how to reboot the server. "This is calculated treason," Chloe hissed, her voice cracking as she slammed her phone onto the mahogany desk. "You've been waiting for years to do this, haven't you? You sat there playing the victim while you sharpened the knife." I laughed, a dry, hollow sound that seemed to startle even my father. "Actually, Chloe, I spent 10 years trying to be the sister you didn't deserve. I spent a decade building a fortress for this family while you were busy trying to decorate it from the outside. I didn't plan this years ago. I planned this exactly 9 hours ago, the moment the person who shares my blood told the entire city I was a liability." I pulled 2 sets of documents from the dossier, when we're past the point of apologies. "Here are your paths forward. Path A. I walk out of this building right now. Within 48 hours, the CoreLogix framework will be fully migrated to my new firm. You'll be left with a beautiful office, 0 software, and a mountain of lawsuits from clients who can't access their data. This company goes into liquidation mode by Friday." Dad looked like he had aged 20 years since the gala. "And Path B?" he whispered. "Path B. You and Chloe sign these immediate letters of resignation. I assume the role of sole CEO and chairwoman of the board. You both retain your equity as equity-only stakeholders. You'll get your dividends, you'll keep your fancy cars, but you will have 0 voting power and 0 access to this building. Chloe gets a one-time consultancy exit agreement. She leaves quietly, with a glowing press release, and never touches a line of my code again." "You can't expect me to just go," Chloe whispered, her bravado finally extinguished. "I expect you to do what you do best, Chloe. Save face," I replied, sliding a pen across the desk. "Sign the papers, and the world will think you're transitioning to new ventures. Don't sign them, and the world will watch you burn a $50 million company to the ground because you were too arrogant to realize who was actually running it. Dad was the first to reach for the pen. His hand shook, but the signature was final. He looked at me, perhaps for the first time in his life, with something resembling fear and a late, bitter respect. Chloe followed a moment later, her signature a jagged scrawl of defeat. As they gathered their things, I sat down in the chair Chloe had tried to claim. It didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a correction. The engine was back where it belonged. 12 months have passed since I took the helm, and under a leadership focused on substance over optics, the firm's valuation hasn't just grown, it has quadrupled. We moved out of the old suite and into a space that reflects what we actually are, a technology powerhouse, not a marketing front. Chloe relocated to London, taking a mid-level consulting role where her MBA actually fits the job description. She's no longer the face of a brand she didn't build, and while I hear she's doing well, our conversations are limited to structured civility during the major holidays. Dad retired to the coast, spending his days in a quiet house that feels a lot smaller than the empire he almost lost. He finally understands that his golden child was the one who nearly burned his legacy. But the realization came with a price. Mom visits me at the office sometimes. She doesn't cry anymore. She just sits in the corner chair, watching the team work with a mixture of pride and a lingering, quiet sadness for the family we used to be. We are successful, but we are fractured. We learned that while you can rebuild a company from the ground up, trust is a much more delicate architecture. I recently received an invitation to deliver the keynote address at the very Ivy League university Chloe attended. The requested topic? The Architect's Advantage, Leading from the Engine Room. I accepted, not out of spite, but because the world needs to know that the quietest people in the room are often the ones holding the blueprints. On my desk, I still keep a small, dusty circuit board from that first basement workshop. I had intended to give it to my father as a reminder of where we started, but now it serves a different purpose. It reminds me that while others are busy polishing the glass, you should be busy building the foundation. In the end, integrity is the only sustainable currency in business and in life. If you believe that competence should always triumph over loud voices and empty titles, hit that like button right now. I want to hear your story. Have you ever been underestimated by the people who should have supported you most? How did you prove them wrong? Drop your experience in the comments below. And if you're here for more stories about turning the tables and finding your power, make sure to subscribe. You're part of a community that values substance over shine, and I'm glad you're here. Success isn't about the noise you make. It's about the silence that follows when you finally show them what you're capable of.